Thank you very much for joining us, Alison. Just to give a bit of background onto why we're here having this conversation. We connected on social media. I think you just said hi on one of our posts and explained that you are both a vet and a hunter. And then we started having conversations about your thoughts on animal death, how that fits into the cycle of things, the cycle of life that we're involved in, and our place in nature. And really, with your studies as a vet, you obviously have a greater insight into animal behaviour, animal awareness, and it's going to be a great pleasure to talk to you and get your thoughts on a lot of the things that people are concerned about when it comes to rearing and killing animals to feed us. So I'll let you give a bit more of a background into your studies, where you currently work and what you're involved in, if you would.
Yeah, okay. So I was born and raised in Lancashire, and I went to university in Liverpool. I was there for 5 years studying veterinary. I graduated in 2017, and after graduating, I moved away from home to southwest Scotland, and I've been working here ever since. So I work in a mixed practice, but I'm predominantly just do farm animal work, probably 90% of the time, and the rest of the time just do the odd sort of small animal consultation session. So yeah, I've been here for a while. I love my job. It's really challenging at times, but I would say it's probably the most interesting profession. And even I've been in it a while now, not as long as a lot of my peers, but you're still learning all the time so much. And a lot of what we do is very relatable to some of the hot topics just now.
And tell me about hunting, because I know that you are involved in kind of hunting. And when is that something you've always done, or more recently? And what do you hunt? What's the motivation there as well?
Yeah, that's fine. So it was something I grew up with, even from a really young age. So both my grandparents farmed, and on my dad's parents' farm, they only lived kind of 10 minutes away from us. We used to walk through the fields to their house, and we ran a small farmer shoot on that farm. So from a young age, we were paid £5 note every Saturday to go and help eat, which means like flushing birds. So it wasn't a commercial shoot, but it was run with game birds. So we would put game birds down, feed them, and then in the winter through the season we'd shoot them. So we were paid to do that at a young age, and both my mum and my dad both shoot. And it wasn't really until my 3rd year at university that I started shooting myself. It actually came about because I split up with my boyfriend, and I was really upset one day. My dad said, "Look, Alison, come with me shooting for the day. Let's have a day out together." So I thought, right, okay, yeah, let's do that. And the first drive, so the days usually split up into drives, and the first one, Dad had, it was a beautiful place, and Dad had had a good time. So he said, "Listen, I'd like to see you shoot for the rest of the day." Okay, so that was me in the driving seat for the rest of the day, which was a little bit scary at the time. It's a lot of pressure because you want to do things right. And I just absolutely loved it. Then on, it just felt like something that I was born to do. So yeah, I was into game shooting for quite a long time. When I moved up here in Scotland, there's a lot more opportunity for me to get involved in that. I suppose when I was at university, I was busy and things, but we'd do a lot of clay shooting. So when I moved up here, I was like, great, I can get back into my hobby again. And probably about a year ago, I met my now partner, and through him got more interested in deer stalking, so what I would call hunting. My obsession with deer started about 10, 12 years ago, and it was through some friends who they were quite into deer stalking, and it was something I didn't really know a lot about. And after an awful lot of pestering, I managed to persuade a friend of a friend to take me. And we went out in the morning, so an early morning stalk, you stalk at first light or at last light. So we went at first light. So we stalked in the dark into a hunting box. So you sit in a raised box so you can see everywhere, but the idea is nothing can obviously see you. So we sat there, and it was in the summer, and I just remember it felt like the most incredible moment. The sun was coming up. It was like the whole place was waking up, and you were just there on your own to experience it. And it was phenomenal. And we didn't shoot anything that morning, and it really didn't matter. You know, it didn't feel that was what it was about. It was more about connecting with nature and connecting with your surroundings, and it was amazing. I was hooked from that moment. But from that day till meeting my now partner, you know, that was a good 10 years. So it just goes to show how difficult something like this is to get into. You know, I didn't have little or no experience in it. You know, it's very much a case of who you know, not what you know, sort of thing. So after meeting my partner, I just became obsessed with it in a way. And it's more for me, I suppose my journey from what shooting means to me and hunting means to me over the years has changed an awful lot. You know, as a young child going with the parents shooting, it was very much, you know, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, things were different then. You know, commercial shooting was very much on the rise. It was very much a status thing. It was very much about, you know, it was a wealth thing, a way to connect with people you didn't know. And I have to say, you know, I was probably involved in some of that. And I suppose now my idea of it has changed so much. The importance for me on hunting for my own food and, you know, having that respect for nature is definitely at the forefront. And yeah, I suppose my attitude towards things has changed an awful lot. And my admiration for people that do it has changed an awful lot as well.
Can
I'm exposed to a lot of different people that see hunting shooting in a... Go on.
So you're I'm glad you're recording the audio separately, because you're on the Zoom, you keep dropping out quite often, and I'm missing parts of what you say. So I'm going to have to piece this together afterwards. But you said the first time you went hunting, you were in your third year as being a veterinary student. So I'd just like to sort of pull back to that really, because was there any conflict between you're basically doing a degree in how to heal animals and how to look after their welfare, and then your hobby is shooting them? Was there any conflict there? How did you see those two fitting together? And did you come up against any sort of backlash from your peers around you at that time? Was there any?
Yes, absolutely. It's a really good point. And honestly, you know, if I'm reflective about it, when you think back to being young and, you know, you just do what your parents do and you do what your friends do and you do what the people who you live around you do, and it's just an accepted norm. So to me, it didn't seem that there was anything wrong with it. And it's probably not, as I've grown up and you have time to reflect on what you do and question yourself, which I think is always a really good thing to do. That I've changed my mindset on that. My peers, some of my peers, you know, to be quite honest with you, the veterinary intake of students is very middle class, you know, white, affluent young people. So it's probably a demographic of its own. So, you know, there was, you know, other students there, my peers that had come from similar backgrounds to me, and therefore, you know, to them it was quite a normal thing as well. So
regardless of the fact that you're studying veterinary science, there wasn't a conflict. People didn't think, how can you be learning how to heal animals and then go out and shoot them at the weekend? That there wasn't a, when you're studying veterinary science, is there a kind of real emphasis, not an emphasis, but an acceptance of death as part of the cycle there?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And whether that's because, again, you go back to that demographic of people, which I think is changing just now. There's a lot more, you know, vegan students at university. That conflict for me didn't really start until I started work. For me, you know, I was learning about it. It was just an accepted part of life for me. You know, with life comes death. And that was just completely accepted by my mindset. And I suppose it wasn't really until I started using social media and until I started working that the implications of some of the things we see in farming, for example, you know, as a country, we're very pro-life, and we love to, you know, put emotions onto animals in this country. And that for me really kind of made me question, you know, what it was that I was doing. I was like, oh, well, you know, is what I'm doing right? Because everyone else says that, you know, I'm a murderer, I'm this, I'm that, etc., etc. And it just starts to get inside your head a little bit. And actually, I'm in a place now, I'm in quite a good place about it now, because I just completely disagree with that. Because there's so much of what we have because of what people like me do. And I think there's just people from the towns, cities, who might come into the countryside and enjoy what we have to offer here is fantastic. But behind all that, they don't understand what goes into that. And, you know, nothing, you know, people sort of go around with rose-tinted glasses on because nothing is what it might seem. Marketing and things like that, you know, we're always at the forefront of things these days, but, you know, nobody's going to market the bad things in the industry. So yeah, no, I suppose at university it honestly never really occurred to me, because it was just completely accepted that with life there is death, and that conflict didn't really start for me until I started work.
Interesting. Okay, so with hunting in the UK, you've sort of touched on a few points there, suggesting that it's not very accessible to people because of cost, and it is seen as a kind of very much a kind of privileged thing to do. Is there anything changing? Is there anything that can help maybe make that a bit more accessible to people? Are there what are the kind of, if you know anything, what are the legalities of somebody just, because obviously we don't have very much of a gun culture here, like in America, for example, where you can go out and buy a hunting rifle, you know where you're allowed to go, what's in season, and just go off and do it. So the barrier to entry is maybe $200 and you're off. But in this country, it's not quite like that. Is there anything that people really do want to connect to their food in that way? How would somebody start hunting if they say, okay, I think a great example of this is deer, because correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand, deer have no natural predators, and without hunting, their numbers would be completely out of control. They'd completely overrun agriculture, and eventually they would end up dying through starvation or disease. And, you know, humans hunting them, we're filling a gap in the food chain of the apex predator, if you like, and keeping numbers in check. So how would somebody, without being, you know, lord or lady something, how could they go and connect with their food source and hunt deer, for example, if they wanted to?
This is such a great question. Probably the best way for someone to get into it, I think, would be, you know, attending your local clay shooting ground. Okay. I know it's not quite there yet, but you're going to be associating with the people that are in the industry, someone who knows someone. There's also places that you can go, I don't just know the names of them, but there are places that you can go that you can pay to be trained in hunting. So basically in this country, you would have to apply firstly for a firearms license. So that means going to the doctors and making sure you haven't got a history of mental health that might impair the reason for being certified of firearms. Then, you know, the police come round to your house, your property, inspect the property, make sure it's safe for you to keep firearms here, and interview you. And then, you know, you can go off and buy your firearms once you've been given a firearms license. So that's all quite heavily licensed in this country. So there's quite a check on that. As for someone coming into that, there are deer stalking certificates that you can do. So there's something called a deer stalking certificate 1, level 1, and a level 2. So they incorporate different things. So your level 1 is mostly about species identification, you know, what time of year you can shoot what deer, and the level 2 incorporates a lot more of your meat hygiene, and you get your trained hunter status at your level 2 now. And from that point, you know, you can certify yourself as a trained hunter, and people might come to you for ask for your help if they've got a deer problem, you know, they might ask.
So there are these steps. If somebody really decided, who isn't, you know, completely loaded and they want to throw like £50,000 at it, there are just steps you can go through to get, you know, the firearms trained, and then you can go and, you know, shoot your own food. It's not impossible. It's just
absolutely. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
So to apply for your firearms is £80,
right?
You know, and then your certificate from the doctors, basically a signed letter to say that you're okay to have the firearms, depends on your doctor's surgery. For myself, it was £30. So that's, you know, we're £110 already. The deer stalking certificate varies depending on who you get that offers that training. The price will vary. And then, from that point, it depends what sort of rifle you want and things. It's like anything, you know, you don't have to spend an awful lot of money on these things to get something that's good.
Yeah.
So there's absolutely a way for people to get into this. What was the other question you asked me? So how can people get into it? And
I was more just, you know, I actually wasn't intending to ask this at all, but it was just as you were talking and you were talking about this, you know, the fact that hunting is seen as very much a kind of privileged sport, if you like, rather than the means of connecting to your own food supply. And I just, you know, thought it'd be interesting to ask you about that as we went along. So let's sort of go back to obviously hunting is something that you do, but presumably you're when you take down a deer, are you then, is that in the freezer for you? And how long would that feed you for?
Yeah, so going back to what you said about deer not having any natural predators, you're absolutely right. So the natural predators of deer in this country, you know, they do claim that maybe seagulls would take young deer. In some places, you know, the foxes can be just
seagulls.
Sea eagles. Yeah, sea eagles.
That's one hell of a mean seagull.
Sorry, it was maybe in my accent. But so they're very limited.
I've never seen one of those.
Very, very limited. Oh, they would be seriously scary, wouldn't they?
Okay, sorry.
So we as humans, we are their only means of keeping population down. There are various quotes on this, but some studies would suggest that just to keep the deer population as it is, so not increasing or decreasing, you would have to cull a fifth of that deer population, which is an awful lot of deer. You know, we estimate that there are something, I think it's about 5 million deer just in Scotland. You know, that's probably nearly just as many people as there are here.
There's 5 million?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Wow, I had no idea there was that many.
So the deer population is quite a big problem in Scotland, and just recently the government have passed a number of new laws that change certain parameters for how we shoot them here. So probably one of the biggest things in Scotland is obviously the Forestry Commission. You know, they plant commercial forests for timber production. So something we're involved with is, you know, the management of deer in these commercial forests. So I think this is something that a lot of people probably don't realise, is that the commercial forest that they might visit at a weekend to cycle, hike, run, you know, those are commercial forests. They are growing timber for us to then consume as paper, furniture, all these sorts of things that we use on a daily basis. But as a result of that, you know, as the trees are grown, so we call this a restock. So basically young trees, and they are like chocolate biscuits to deer. Deer love young trees, and what they do is they eat the tops of them, and it deforms the way that they grow. So, you know, it's going to limit your production, basically. Right. So and we that cull the deer.
The amount of carbon that's coming out of the atmosphere going into that tree, the sequestration.
Exactly, yeah. So we manage the deer from that point of view. So obviously venison is a byproduct of this whole system. So Highland Game is a company that take the deer carcasses, the venison, and they export it. They sell it in the supermarket, actually. But therefore, it wasn't until I realised this, how sustainable and how important it was that we ate more venison in this country.
Yeah.
You know, this is a meat that is grown in wild on our doorstep.
Yeah.
And is having to be culled because of our own consumerism. So therefore, we have a responsibility to eat it, in my opinion.
But it's having to be culled also because for our own convenience, we removed the things that would have naturally culled it, right? Which would have been wolves, bears, you know, killer seagulls, that sort of thing. So we've kind of, it's, you know, we've removed those predators because of presumably sheep farming, right? So, you know, because we didn't want the wolves eating our sheep. And so now there's nothing to keep the deer in stock. Am I right in saying that I think the majority of UK venison is actually exported? I think a lot of it ends up going to France, right? Because we've lost our taste for it. And no, I'd love to see it more wild shot venison in UK supermarkets. I think one of the problems is, and this was one of the things when I was a 25-year vegetarian and having done a degree in food science. And when I came back to eating meat for health reasons, I was determined to kind of try everything. I wanted to kind of just get back into it. And I remember going to a farmer's market and there was a guy selling venison and he said, "Do you want to buy some venison?" And I said, "Not really. It tastes like sweaty old boots and I don't like it." And he went, "Come on, when did you last eat venison?" And I said, "Well, okay, I was a kid and it was, you know, musky and horrible and I didn't like it very much." And he said, "What you've eaten as a kid would have been some like musky old stag that's been overhung because it would have been tough as old boots otherwise." And he sold me a loin of venison and he told me how to cook it. And he said, "I'm here next week. If you don't like it, I'll give you your money back." And I was like, can't say fairer than that. And he told me to roll it in a mixture of
awesome. What a salesman. Yeah.
And sear it really hot, really fast, leave it very rare and pink in the middle, like you would tuna, sashimi or something. And it was absolutely incredible. It was delicate, it was delicious. It could have almost been like the freshest tuna I'd ever tasted. It was just so unlike what I'd had before. And I think if we could get that kind of people to try venison that tasted like that, we might be able to. And it was incredibly lean, of course, you know, but it's also very rich in selenium, right? And the fats that are in it are very high omega-3. So yeah, healthy.
Oh, incredibly, yeah. Really, really healthy. And I know you asked me, which I never answered, was if we shot a deer and I put it in the freezer, how long would it last? Yeah. Well, it doesn't last long because, you know, the neighbour always comes around, they want some, you know, people from work, they want some. My mum and dad, they always put orders in for it. So yeah, it doesn't last long in our freezer, which I love. You know, I actually love the process of butchering that myself and processing it myself.
You butcher it yourself, do you?
You know, it's very home taught. I'm not an expert.
Wow, okay.
I've hopefully, once things allow us with COVID restrictions, I'd really like, well, the local butcher has offered to show me how to do it properly because I've just kind of learnt from YouTube, which is still great.
You're a veterinary surgeon, right?
But yeah, so
you're doing it with scalpels and it should be like all perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just the same, you know, it's a bit like doing a post-mortem, but at the same, you know, you're just trying to do it a bit neater because you want to eat it at the end of the day.
Of course, but you should understand the anatomy,
but yeah, it's fascinating. Right? Exactly, yeah. So yeah, no, I love it. But yeah, I mean, our favourite cuts, like you said, the tenderloin, amazing. So tender, as it would suggest. And, you know, we make beef Wellingtons out of it. It's so good on the barbecue in the summer. Sometimes we might just, like you said, exactly how you did it. That is the best way. It tastes incredible. Mince, I think that usually is the best way to get people into it. Try mince or stewing steak. Yeah, it's just, I think it has a great flavour. Some people genuinely don't like it, and that's fine. But I think it doesn't taste too far from chicken and beef of what we order. It's a much mellow flavour. We don't hang our venison for very long.
I think that's
and
the key,
flavour is quite mellow. Obviously, the longer you hang it, the more of a gamey, stronger flavour you're going to get.
I lost you a bit there, but I think I caught you. So, okay, we've talked a bit about your hunting and the sort of the reasons for that and how that kind of fits into what's actually happening in nature. I'd like to kind of come back a bit to your day job now, and you know, as a vet working in agriculture, rather than kind of, you know, sick kittens and, you know, the type of veterinary, when people think of a vet, they think of where they take their dog or cat when they're ill. But something that I was really fascinated in when you told me, and I didn't actually realize this, but veterinarians are in abattoirs and are also responsible for, you know, for killing animals, but to do it in a way that offers the animals the minimum amount of suffering. This is something that, even as a co-founder of a business to do with meat, I have to honestly say I know very little about how animals are dispatched. And I also don't know much about the difference between it being done very well and done very badly. I do now know the difference when I eat a piece of beef that I think hasn't come from a good source, in that there seems to be a sort of metallic flavor and something sort of slightly different. And someone once told me that could be down to stress hormones at the point of slaughter. So one of the things that people keep coming up and posting, you know, vegans will post on our Facebook page, it's not ethical to take the life of something that doesn't want to die. And that really got me thinking, what does not wanting to die actually mean? Well, to me, it would mean that you understand what death is and you have a sense of it being about to happen. And my consideration as somebody who basically has a business that sells meat, that when the death is done correctly, this is a neutral for the animal, in that it should be lights out. There is no sense of, oh my God, I'm about to die. There should be no sense of, I'm going to, you know, miss this, that, or the other, because it's instant being to not being. And at that moment, something goes from being an animal to being meat. And that's, you know, but how does it actually happen in good abattoirs? And what do abattoirs do to give the highest quality and welfare of killing, basically? Can you just talk through the process a little bit?
Yeah. Such all great points. And I suppose coming from the veterinary industry, you know, when we go to see a sick animal, we obviously come up with what we call a differential list. So this is the list in our heads, usually, of, you know, what could be wrong with this animal. And then from that list, we then discuss with the client, because obviously it's different from pets and cats and dogs. You know, we're in a commercial setting, you know, this is, you know, people's businesses, people's livelihoods. You know, we have to make the best choice for the animal and for our client. That's important too. And I must stress that death, so in our profession, you know, we're very lucky that we have the option of euthanasia. I would never consider euthanasia as a welfare issue, ever. You know, in some circumstances, you know, to keep an animal alive just for our pleasure or to protect our feelings is not necessarily the best thing for the animal. So you know, we would never say that euthanasia is.
So I think there's a bit of a delay, and I'm asking a question.
I would say so. Yeah, I would.
So sometimes you think the decisions
made,
no,
it's okay. No, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Around pets are in the interest of us, not the animals, right? Okay. But with farm animals, it's a bit more pragmatic.
In some instances, yes. Yeah.
So
we're very pragmatic bunch of people, definitely.
Sorry, I think we're a few seconds behind each other here. This is super weird. So when you're attending a sick farm animal and you have to decide whether you help that animal to continue living or euthanasia is the best thing to do, it's more of a pragmatic decision because there's no emotional connection to that animal like there would be with your cat or your dog or something.
I wouldn't say there's no emotional connection at all. You know, I've been in many circumstances where, you know, these animals mean a lot to these clients. And I wouldn't take emotion out of it, no. I think if you get to a point where you feel absolutely no emotion, then there's either something wrong with you or, you're doing the wrong job. And, we never would go to university for 5 years. I would never get up at 2:00 in the morning. I would never work the hours that I do for the wage that I earn if I wasn't emotionally involved in my job.
No, I was meaning more higher,
so,
presumably as a farmer.
I don't... Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I think they're the same. In fact, sometimes they're probably worse. They, they're the same. This isn't a case of they just turn up to a job and go home and don't think about it. This is their whole entire life. Yeah. They live and breathe for what they do. So it means an awful lot to them. They hate waste. They don't want to see an animal wasted, and they're always going to do their best, to keep that animal healthy. But unfortunately, animals do not read biology books. Animals don't read the things about books about what they're supposed to do. They always do things they're not supposed to do because these are unpredictable animals. So yeah, no, I definitely would say that clients are emotional when it comes to these things. Sometimes some clients don't want to be present if you have to put an animal to sleep, and that's fine. Sometimes it's not something that I enjoy necessarily doing, but it's a...
Sorry, Alison. So the same farmer who might eventually drive that animal to an abattoir might not want to be around if you have to euthanize that animal ahead of that time.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because one of the things, again, this is obviously we have a good connection with our farmers and our suppliers, and we speak to them. We know that they care for their animals, but I think a lot of people that come to our website to kind of troll and ask questions. Some people are asking genuine questions, but there's a lot of kind of trolling from, people that think we shouldn't be eating animals, who don't think it's possible to actually care for an animal where the end intention of raising that is to kill it. And I personally think that shows a real disconnect from the natural world, but.
That's almost like saying that health workers don't really care about old people because they're going to die anyway. That's just such a bizarre concept. We are, I would say, farmers, people that work and live in the countryside. We are custodians of nature. We are the people that look after nature, that look after the animals that live here, that look after each other that live here. And the problem is that people that live in the towns and cities and look at us and they do not understand that. They do not understand that we are born, live and work and die in this environment. And we do it, we wouldn't do that if we didn't enjoy it. We wouldn't do it if we didn't care. So yeah, I just think it's just a total disconnect, really. I do understand it. I do. But it's that thing that animals are sentient beings. I don't completely agree with that, but they cannot think cognitively. They cannot anticipate death. They anticipate stress, but they cannot anticipate death.
That's a really...
So, as you were saying about animals...
Yeah, that's a really, really kind of crucial, quite poignant thing to say, is that they understand stress, but not the concept of death, because that was, one of my replies to when people say you can't kill something that doesn't want to die. And my reply sometimes would be, well, can you explain what you mean by doesn't want to die? And quite often that will just abruptly end the conversation, because when you start thinking about our understanding of death versus an animal, that's something I really wanted to talk to you about today. So talk me through what actually happens to, say, a cow in a good abattoir. What is the process, and what is your understanding of that animal's understanding of what's happening when things are done as well as they can be?
Okay, yeah, so let's go right from the farm. Let's start the farm. So it's a Monday. The farmer knows on that Monday that he takes cattle to a market that are going to be sold fat. So normally at that market, there'll be a representative from the abattoir that will buy these cattle that he knows are going to fit the consumer. Okay, so he'll buy the cattle, they'll go onto a wagon, and then they'll be transported. Now, even that process is very, there's a lot of paperwork that's involved. The animals are not allowed to travel over certain periods of time without food and water. But normally, if we're talking from a auction to an abattoir, they shouldn't be transported much further than 2 hours, I think it is. It's different when we get into export, different story. But so they arrive at the abattoir, they're then unloaded into a lairage, which lairage just means basically pens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And normally these pens they're extremely clean, but they're not going to stay there that long. Okay. So if they have to stay overnight, food and water is provided for these animals. If they're not staying overnight and they're going to be killed, then what happens is the animals will be loaded into a system. So, I mean, we've talked about Morgan Temple. Have you Temple Morgan even? I mix her name up, but a lot of people. Temple Grandin. I always get this wrong. Fascinating lady.
Yeah.
And some people, I suppose my generation, I hadn't really heard of her. But my mum and dad, they remember the documentary that came out about her, and she did an awful lot of work. She was autistic.
Yeah.
And she made herself a cupboard that when she felt she was having an anxiety attack, or, when she needed to be isolated, she went into the cupboard and the cupboard would squeeze her and that would give her relief. So she actually felt she was very connected to animals, and she felt that this might help animals. So a lot of the infrastructure in abattoirs is built around some of her theories. So that being that they go through races that are high and blackened so that the animals can't see other than what's in front of them. So this helps with the flow of animals. So it helps them just move forwards. All right. So for cattle, for example, they'll go through these races and then they'll go into an isolation box. In that box, someone from above, so the animal normally doesn't really see them, will then stun them. Okay, so this is done by a bolt gun, which is basically, it is an armed gun, but it just fires out a long rod of metal from the end really fast. And what that does, the animal probably won't even feel it. It basically goes through the skin so fast and hits the base of the brain. So the base of the brain is what controls your heart rate and your breathing. So once we disturb that, the animal's then stunned. All right, so the animal is unconscious.
When you say stunned, is that kind of lights out at that stage then? Like what we'd call... That's
lights out.
Right. So just to kind of
complete blackout.
Comes into a very quiet room, unfamiliar space, but quiet, designed in a way to minimize stress. The animal at this stage in a good facility is not like freaking out and trying to escape and kicking and screaming. It's just walking quietly, and then somebody who it can't see comes from behind, above, and
usually above. So the boxes, and then you platform above.
Okay, and then this stun gun, is this a recoverable bolt, or is this like a bullet, or what's the mechanism there? Is it something that comes in and comes out again?
Yes, it's a recoverable bolt. So it goes out and comes back in. It happens so fast. So you have obviously nerve sensations in your skin, but underneath that, the brain is obviously full of nerves, but there is no pain sensation. That's why they allow us to do open brain surgery without any anaesthetization. Because there's no pain receptor in the head. Okay, so at this point they're completely unaware of what's happened, complete blackout, lights out, they stop breathing, the heart rate is stopped, and they don't have any menace response. So that response is, if I was to poke you in the eye, you would blink. Okay, and that means that you're conscious. That is the last response, last reflex to cease in an unconscious animal. Okay, so we know if we've got a successful stun, if we haven't got rhythmic breathing, and we've got an absence of a menace response. And from that point, what happens is we call it that the animal is then sticked. So that's just a sort of lay term for it, but what it means is that the throat is slit and the animal is bled. Okay, so but at that point the animal is not aware of this at all.
Okay, so
no, it's okay.
You mentioned that there's a test you do to make sure that it's worked. What kind of percentage of animals might that stunning process not be quite as complete as you would like?
Okay, well, I wouldn't like to comment on what happens in an abattoir, only because I don't have the figures for you. But if you wanted to look for them, the Humane Slaughter Association would probably help you out with that. From my own point of view, because we do this process on farm as well, so we have something that's called a Schedule 19, and which allows us to slaughter an animal on farm on the basis of welfare grounds because it's unable to travel to an abattoir because it's sustained an acute injury, such as a broken leg, for instance. So, you know, an animal that's very fit for the food chain, but cannot travel, we can slaughter it on farm. So, you know, this is a process that I would do. So we sign a certificate, do an ante-mortem inspection, perform the slaughter, and normally the way in which I do this, as I've described, it's normally an animal that's recumbent, so you know, an animal that's laid on the floor. Right. What I tend to do is basically fill a bucket of feed, so they're feeding from a bucket of feed, but as I shoot them, so they have absolutely no concept of what's about to happen. So it goes back to that discussion about, you know, animals cannot think cognitively that, oh, I'm about to die, this girl is holding a bolt gun, that means that this cow doesn't understand that. Yeah. But they do respond to stress. Yeah. So a really interesting study that's going on just now from the University of Liverpool, and Rob Smith is involved in it, is ways in which we can measure stress in animals is via measuring cortisol levels in the blood. Yeah. This is the same as in humans. Exactly the same, yep. So we can do that in animals. So this study that's going on just now takes blood samples from animals that are killed in an abattoir compared to animals that are killed in situ. So, for example, they're basing this on deer, actually. So they're taking blood samples from deer that are slaughtered in an abattoir compared to deer that are shot in situ in the field. And so far, this isn't published just yet, but so far what they've found, which is amazingly interesting, is that the animals that are shot in situ, even if they're not alone, the amount of cortisol in their blood is absolutely tiny compared to that goes through an abattoir, those animals that go through an abattoir. And even those animals, so when you shoot a deer, we aim for the chest, so we obviously aim for a very clean shot, the heart or lung. Sometimes when you hit the lung shot, the animal doesn't die straight away. They'll sometimes lift all 4 feet off the ground and then they'll die and drop down dead. Even those animals that they've taken blood samples from, their cortisol levels are still at a minuscule level, which is great news, you know, because sometimes something like that to somebody could look awful. You know, you might not think you've taken a clean shot, that animal's still alive. But the animal isn't stressed. The animal still doesn't know anything about it, which is great. So like I said, this data isn't published yet. It will be published shortly. There is one other paper that I've read that compares a similar thing. So cattle that were slaughtered in an abattoir compared to like a mobile slaughter unit. And it was just basically one mobile unit was compared with one abattoir, so it wasn't a huge sample size, but they came out with similar results. So it'll be really interesting to see the result of that.
There is, even in a good abattoir, there is a bit more stress than in the field.
Yeah, yes, of course. And that stress obviously comes from, we're talking about animals that you're loading them into a wagon. You know, let's take sheep, for example, this time of year. You know, they've just given birth. These lambs, all they know is the lambing shed or the field that they've just been born into. Right. And throughout their life, all they might know is the next door field and the next door field after that. And then when it comes to the fact that they become of a weight that they're able to go to the abattoir, we then have to load them into a foreign environment. Yeah. You know, by all accounts, moving them from one field to the next would be enough stress to kill a sheep.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's something
So,
familiar
you know,
rather than sort of, oh my God, I'm in for the chop here. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Um,
So it's just the fact that it's a different environment.
one of our farmers was explaining to us how she will eat a steak from pretty much every animal that she sends. She's quite small scale, and she noted one day that one of the steaks had a sort of strange metallic weird taste to it, and traced that animal back. And she was actually a GP before being a farmer, so she had a pretty good understanding of physiology and endocrinology. And she was saying that this one steak tasted a bit weird, and she managed to trace back that the animal slipped over in the abattoir and got up and then went through to be killed. And she said what happened was the abattoir should have done is taken that animal aside and given it 10 minutes to calm down. And she said the difference between humans and I'm going to ask you to kind of corroborate or elaborate on my statement here. But she said the main difference between animals that have grown up being prey to other animals and the way we are, for example, is that if we see or experience something stressful, we experience long-term kind of chronic stress and maybe even PTSD or something from the memory of seeing that happen. And we experience stress. Our stress hormones take a much longer time to rebalance. Whereas an animal such as a cow, within 10 minutes, it's baseline again. Within 10 minutes of experiencing something stressful, it could be as simple as slipping over and getting back up again. But all it takes is 10 minutes, all the cortisol, all the adrenaline, all of the breathing, the heart rate and everything are down. And the animal won't have a long-term memory of that as being a stressful thing. Is this something that you can corroborate or elaborate on in any way?
Absolutely. I mean, so to put it simply for people, I suppose if animals thought the way we do, something such as childbirth, for example, for an animal is very stressful. If they then thought about that for their entire life, in such a way that some people, something can affect them so badly that they might not want to ever leave the house again. It might mean that they never want to do something that they've done before ever again. Whereas animals just are not like that. It has to become a learned behaviour for them not to want to do it again. Whereas prey animals very much respond to a stress stimulus, like you say, and at that point their stress levels can become so high that they can actually die, but then returns back to baseline very, very quickly, and that allows them to survive out in the wild. Such as, if they went around worried about the things the way we worry about them, they would never survive. So it's really important actually for their survival that they're able to do that. So yeah, it's not a case of that the animal can think cognitively about what is about to happen. It purely just responds to stress stimuli. And like I say, they can recover from that extremely quickly. And that is just a genetic code that they have that is different to ours.
So it's very much an evolutionary tactic, really, for an animal that has grown up as a part of the food chain. One thing I'd like to just ask you about.
Oh,
Sorry, there's a delay and it's making it hard to ask questions. One of the things I'd like to ask you about as well is you mentioned about when you have to sometimes euthanize an animal, such as a cow with a broken leg in a field. If we were witnessing a human being killed in close proximity to us, we would get very stressed out about that situation, and we'd get emotional, and we'd start thinking about that person's life and our life, and what is the implications of it all. When you have to euthanize a cow in a field, and presumably other cows are in the field with it, what's the response of the other animals?
They have no idea what's just happened. Absolutely no idea. If anything, they're inquisitive. So obviously, for example, I did one recently where it was actually inside in a bedded straw pen. It was a bedded straw yard, actually, and we'd penned off the girl that broke her leg individually. and I shot and bled the animal, and all the other cows were just stood around watching. You know, they weren't scared, they didn't run, because like I said, they don't understand what is happening. That is purely, they just see something happening, they don't think it's a threat to them, so they're not moving away from that. They can't think cognitively about that, they do not understand that. And every experience I've ever had of that, that is the same over and over again. These animals are more inquisitive than anything. They might come up and want to know what's going on, and if anything, you have to shoo them away. So I would say that probably goes against what most people would expect to happen, but that is very much the reality of it. Yeah,
that's something that came out from what you're just saying there, which was super fascinating, is they don't have a sense of danger from seeing something happen to another of their kind, only if that danger is a threat to them as a being. Is that true then? Is that how that's a major difference between us and animals?
Yeah, huge. So we feel empathy. You know, if I saw somebody hurting you, that empathy in me would, automatically put that feeling onto me and say that is a negative thing that you're doing to him. Whereas cows, they don't think empathy, they don't have the ability to think like that, and again, this comes back to evolution. We are completely different to these animals, and for thousands of years, this word domesticated, these animals are domesticated. I think it's actually quite funny that they use that word, because its Latin origin, means to live in a house. And if anything, these animals probably domesticated us, not the other way around. So the way we've bred these animals, we've bred them for certain traits, but things they haven't lost are the way that the brain is designed. So yeah, they can't think like that. They don't have that capacity, basically.
Okay, so what about, would an animal, say, miss another animal? Like, let's say one is taken to the abattoir, but the other ones aren't. Would they have a sense of that guy has been removed from the herd? What happened to it? Where is it? I miss my friend. Do they have that same sense of individual identity, belonging, and longing? Or that's probably a really difficult question to answer, but what are your thoughts on that?
No, it's a really good point. I don't fully understand that, but I do believe that there are a couple of people that say that definitely does happen. Particularly, I'm trying to think, I think it's definitely in elephants. But there was another species that someone had come out and said this about. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure, and I wouldn't like to comment and say the wrong thing. But they, we would automatically put that onto our dog, for instance. If you've got two dogs and one dog dies, the other dog that's left, a lot of people, in fact, they bring them to the vet sometimes because they'll show signs of, for example, one of our dogs was actually my partner's dad's dog, and since he passed away, the dog has bilateral alopecia. He's lost a lot of his hair, and one of that, that can be a sign of grieving, actually. Does that happen in prey animals? I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you, but I think they would have the capacity, yes. How that works it'd be an interesting one, because I haven't read the papers that suggest that.
Maybe there's a big.
But I wouldn't.
Maybe there's a big difference though with dogs.
Yeah, I think again.
We've bred dogs.
Oh, definitely.
The similar emotional responses that we do, and dogs have learned to pick up social cues from humans. One of the things that I read about, researching our relationship with dogs, is that they've learned to make eye contact, which dog to dog eye contact is threatening, but dog to human eye contact is endearing. Yeah. And so they have to learn how to go against something that's instinctual to benefit their relationship with humans, which I found really interesting. So
how amazing is that? It's amazing, isn't it? But yeah, no, not entirely sure. I've heard of maybe one one, but maybe two species that can do that. Again, is it more to do with a learned behaviour? No, if they were closely associated with another animal and they've just grown up and learned that animal's always there, is that become a bit like, oh, this person isn't there anymore, and we used to go here, and when I was here there was always somebody else here with me. Whether it's more that than actual empathy, not sure.
And we've kind of focused quite a bit on cows. I think probably because out of the animals that we eat, they're the biggest, and it seems like they're also and I guess people assume because they're the biggest, they have the biggest capacity for cognition. But what about poultry, pork, sheep? How do you think they vary, or do you think everything we've been talking about in relation to beef is also relevant to pigs, poultry, and sheep? What are the kind of differences in the major four species that we eat?
Yeah, so the major difference is pigs are exceptionally susceptible to stress. So that metallic flavour that you were talking about, that your friend experienced, that your client experienced, is a very, very real thing, particularly in pigs. So it's actually of benefit to abattoirs, people that slaughter pigs, to make the experience as stress-free as possible, because the stress taints the meat. The stress causes the blood to basically produce a chemical which, like you say, makes the meat taste metallic. So it's in the interest of abattoirs and slaughterhouses to make that experience less stressful. Obviously, welfare covers all species, but each one is very individual. So chickens, for example, everybody likes the idea of free range, organic chickens. And we see these sheds that have outdoor spaces for the chickens to do whatever they want in, basically. How often you see the chickens out in these is not very often, particularly in southwest Scotland. It rains a lot here, it's cold, the chickens do not like the cold, they'd rather be inside. So it's little things like this, I think, that people don't really appreciate, that their idea of where they think an animal should live is not necessarily that animal's best idea of where it would want to be. Chickens and pigs, for example, probably would originate from woodland, so being enclosed, rooting, and that sort of behaviour. Sheep, well, a lot of the sheep we've got here, they would originate from hill farms, so they're, some of the sheep we have around here are extremely hardy. So we don't see an intensive farming of sheep, really, probably because they wouldn't awfully survive in it. The probably most intensive you'll get with sheep is rearing what we call stall lambs, so lambs that aren't big enough to kill, that are fattened, and that can be done indoors. But the large proportion of breeding sheep will be kept outside majority of the year, which in some places is extremely harsh conditions.
So really the key to high welfare farming is to recreate as close as possible the natural environment that animal would have evolved in, if you like. So as you said, one of our suppliers keeps the pigs in a forest, and the pigs there's I think 100 pigs in 250 acres of woodland, and pigs just run through and they clear the undergrowth out and they eat the brambles and the nettles, and then the native trees can grow faster. And with chickens being completely free range might be more stressful than when they feel like they're a bit enclosed. Would that be the case?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we have what's called the 5 freedoms, which is basically a very basic list of 5 absolute things that animals must always have, and those include, access to food, access to water, and one of those is the ability to express their natural behaviour, which is a really important one, which can be interpreted in many different ways. for some of your clients, they'll be doing a lot better job of that than some of my clients. So yeah, no, I think the answer to good animal welfare is taking the species individually. And in some places, in some of my clients, I love the phrase of, oh, we let the animals choose, have one client who puts up big beach balls that hang from the ceiling for the calves. They absolutely love that. So yeah, I think letting the animals choose what they want is good too.
Interesting. So, but when you're letting them choose what you want, you have to give them the choice, right? So good farming is allowing those environments to exist.
Option. Yeah.
Wow.
And with that comes cost, and that's.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is no getting around it. Factory farming can produce much cheaper meat, but it is at the cost of the animal's welfare compared to natural regenerative farming. I'm pretty much kind of wrapped up there. We've covered an awful lot of stuff, and you've really kind of enlightened me, particularly to the slaughter process. You've kind of shed some light on things there. So, what do you think can be done though what can people do? What's the sort of action people who maybe aren't our customers, because we do try and source from as high welfare places as we can, but what's in place really to stop bad practice happening, and how can people make better decisions about sourcing their meat?
Yeah, this is such a good question. So particularly recently, since I think it was last week or the week before, the agricultural bill went through, which means that for our country, we are allowed to import meat products into our country that do not necessarily meet the welfare standards that the farmers and producers in our country have to meet. So the farmers and producers in this country have some of the highest welfare standards in the world, and they cost an awful lot of money to maintain. You can't expect farmers to do all these things for their animals that doesn't incur a cost, but that cost has to go somewhere, and naturally it's imposed onto the consumer. I think if people really want to do something good for the environment and they want to eat meat sustainably, the best way to do that is to eat it as local as you can, really. If not from this country, from as local as possible. And if not from as local as possible, I meant at least from this country, as an absolute minimum. There are things, labels that you can look out for that. Red Tractor, for instance, is one, and just checking the label and making sure the origin is actually from the UK, because that can catch people out as well.
But Red Tractor to me is pretty basic though, right? I mean, Red Tractor for me doesn't really go beyond common sense and basic decency. What's the next level up from Red Tractor?
Oh, well, there's all kinds of things that you can see. I have a little bit of a gripe with organic, to be honest. That's my personal opinion. We have organic clients, and would I say their welfare is as good as some others? I wouldn't agree that it is, to be honest. So, I mean, the PFLA, obviously, I find their stuff's quite hard to source, to be honest. You find that kind of thing a lot more in restaurants.
That's what we do.
And online.
Yeah.
So, well, yourselves then, the ethical butcher. But yeah, as far as labelling goes, the RSPCA assured as well, they have better welfare standards than the Red Tractor. So, and above that, each supermarket will have their own welfare standards too. So you can look into that. So, for example, milk that's produced for Tesco has different standards that is produced for Morrisons, for example. Right. So, you can look into these things. But yeah, we have a lot of Arla 360 clients within our practice, and they produce milk for Morrisons, and the welfare standard of these farms is exceptionally good. So, I don't think the supermarkets, they don't promote the welfare standards enough of some of the farms that supply for them. But then again, this sort of relationship that the supermarkets have with producers drives a lot of production for as little money as possible. And again, that impacts animal welfare. So if you want to buy a product that has come from a high welfare producer, then the best place you can find these are your local butcher, and have the discussion with them.
So it sounds like an unfortunate but very simple way of figuring out the welfare of the animal is looking at the cost of the final product, if you like, because all the things you've mentioned as you've been talking are, there's a cost here, there's a cost here, there's a cost here. Needs more land, it needs more, takes longer to grow, you know, people are going to take better care. So we've often said there is no such thing as cheap meat, because somewhere in the chain, somebody or something has paid the price for you to have cheap meat.
Yeah.
So it would seem an indication that if something is expensive without being rare, the welfare would be higher. Would that work, do you think?
Absolutely, I 100% agree with that. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that can be extrapolated onto anything that we consume, clothes, anything. You know, you really do pay for what you get for. Yeah. So, yeah. And I think maybe a couple of generations ago, people would put a lot more emphasis on the food that they bought. You know, their major outgoings was the food that they consumed in a month. Whereas now people's major outgoings are for entertainment. You know, everyone wants the latest phone, the latest car, the latest fashionable clothes. And until we address that mentality, I don't think we're going to make huge gains when it comes to environmental progress. But, you know, if you really do want to do your bit, then food is definitely where you can start. And I think supporting local and, you know, trying to eat local food is definitely the best way forward.
No, I agree. But local to us doesn't really mean much, because we're an online business serving the whole UK. But yeah. if by local,
but still, that's great. It's UK based. Yeah.
So hopefully we're local to everybody. But Alison, thank you so much. I think we've really kind of completed the circle there, and you've given me some great insight into basically the danger, well, not the danger, but the natural sense of humans to anthropomorphize our own species onto other species and assume levels of welfare based on that, which is kind of really what I hope we dig into in this hour and 15 minutes we've been talking. So unless
well, I enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
You'd like to kind of talk about or expand on, I think we're in a good place.
No, I think we're good. I think I've probably created more questions for people, which, you know, is always a good thing. I like to make people think. So hopefully, yeah, I hope it's, yeah, like I said, answered some of your questions. So that's good.
Thank you. One more thing to ask then. If when I release this podcast, if we do have an awful lot of questions, can we maybe do a half-hour session and go through the questions?
I would definitely be up for that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very kind. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up the recording now.
Yeah.